New York City. Born and raised. One of the few you will actually meet who were born and raised in New York City.
My dad was a luggage salesman and later luggage manufacturer, and my mom was a homemaker. And a very good one, except she couldn't cook.
Yeah, I'm an upper middle class. Well, I come from. Well, I guess I am an upper middle class white Jewish guy.
I grew up at the beach, South Bay, surf, sand, sun, skateboards, drugs, long shaggy hair, girls in bikinis. That was very happening.
If there's such a thing as upper working class, I suppose that would be what it is. Or lower middle class. I mean, that's where I'm from, yeah.
Since my parents were attorneys, business career was kind of encouraged in our family. They were asking me till I was 45 when I was going to get a job.
My dad's a used car salesman, and my mom worked at a bomb factory for 14 years, or 18 years. And then the plant closed on her, and they split up. My dad was a used car salesman, so he was out, you know, womanizing and drinking. And my mom ended up getting no pension.
They survived the Second World War, meaning that my mother spent 3 years in Siberia, and then she ended up going to India and Africa, where she met my father, who was Polish also. And from there they came to the England.
It was just a lot of moving around because my dad was in the Navy, you know, kind of always the new kid in town and feeling isolated a lot. And, you know, Dad wasn't around too much.
I'm a farm boy, actually. My dad was in Palestine for the first 3 years of my life, so I didn't see him. And then when he came back, I was pissing in the bed all the night. So it was one of those unfortunate situations that me and my dad didn't really get on very much after that.
My childhood, I was, you know, I had like 7 stepfathers, and they were all very abusive, and I, you know, got knocked around a lot. And my mom and my stepfathers were drunks, and it was pretty ugly.
I also remember promising myself as a kid not to forget how miserable it was to be a kid. And so I've always tried to be true to that.
Punk was naked. It was to the bone. There was nothing. It was survivalist.
Anger and energy, and
There is no one definition of punk rock. Because it was one thing in New York City, it was one thing in LA, it was one thing in San Francisco, it was one thing in London.
Unschooled, alienated people in T-shirts making a lot of noise.
you know, sort of release of tension.
My definition of punk rock is if you don't know, then fuck you.
You know, these guys are coming up with all these definitions, and it's just it's just an aggressive thing for me.
You know, there was an agenda of self-expression, and I think some of the more arty bands probably had an agenda of being arty.
And our whole thing was, you know, it's from the same thing as it's always been. The audience is the enemy. You gotta, when you go up there, fuck them. It's about us. And if they want to be a part of it, then that's great. Then we're all together. But they're still the enemy.
It was much more loud and protesting, and much more political in England than in New York. And in New York, the groups, it was more of a social politics where people were talking about what was going on to them. But in England, it was much more of a general politics, cultural protest.
It didn't have an agenda in the same way that the hippie movement did before.
A lot of drugs and swirly hands in the air and the butterfly dance, and
they were interested in anti-Vietnam protest and recreational drugs and, you know, sexual liberation, women's rights and so on and so forth. They had an agenda.
I wasn't into the whole, you know, commune, free love and all that. I really felt, you know, that a lot of that was just another trick to get girls to take their tops off, you know, and have sex. And
I had to wake up to Led Zeppelin, full blare, dirty hippies at my house, everyone falling down, rescuing my sister, getting, you know, everyone's making love. This was, you know, late 70s, and I had no desire to be in any of that. I didn't like it, you know, and we had a guy who played in a Boston cover band, and none of it appealed to me at all. I didn't want anything to do with it. Coke, I would always think rock and roll, fucking. And then the Ramones. We heard the Ramones when we were going to escape contest, and then it was just like the complexity, the guitar. What's that? No, why is that? Yeah. You know, and you put that with skateboarding, and it was just great.
the thing with the hippie movement was, like I said, it was just too laid back. It was just like way too cool. And it was like, well, I won't do it today, I'll do it tomorrow. If I even get around to doing it tomorrow. Whereas for us, it was like, we wanted it right now.
What was it that you wanted right now?
That's a really good question.
I said, this is the first time I've ever seen music really change. You know, I mean, there was the birth of rock and roll, okay, yeah, you know. But then, this is the first time music actually really changed, you know.
I look at that late 70s scene as it was an inevitable occurrence.
It's basically about creating and affirming that sort of teenage reality, which is a rejection of all stodgy, conventional, uptight grown-upness, you know, deliberately spitting in the face of that, doing what you can to offend it.
And that's why I had to document it, because it was something, I mean, the way everybody looked, the way they thought, the way they did their art, their music, everything was different. All bets were off. I mean, not too many times in one's life does that change happen.
I mean, at school, there were perhaps 4 people who were interested in the music at all. And it really was a cult thing. And people looking back think that it was some kind of major deal, like the techno scene is now, that everybody was into it. It just wasn't the case. I mean, there were only 4 people at school that were remotely interested. And you had to make an effort to get hold of the records. I remember travelling miles to buy God Save the Queen and other records. So there was that sort of element to it. So you had to make an effort to get into it in the first place.
Punk was me. Do you understand? I felt I could turn around and go, never mind Richard Hell or Johnny Rotten or Mick Jones or any of the other people. Do you understand? I am one version of punk rock.
People found a voice through punk, and it was a great leveller, and it did mean that people could express themselves in a way that they couldn't before.
I am the propaganda of punk rock, as of what it was as a spiritual thing. Not in a religious manner, but in an attitude that, as I said, it was from instantly telling anybody what you felt rather than what you were thinking, because then you have those ideologies that can be fought for in a way of a democratic, talking, discussional issue.
Look, when I remember the few times I had like an amazing experience in a rock and roll concert, whatever the music was, at that moment. But the great moments of my life were the moments when I would like get lost in the music in such a way that it became what perhaps a church can offer for someone. It became like this moment of like feeling connected to everybody in that room in a very profound way, and knowing that we are all sharing this great moment together, and we understand what is going on that stage, because that person is like leading us through the ceremony.
I wanted to pull God out of my chest. That was what I wanted to do. It wasn't like, a visual thing with me. I wanted to pull like the deepest conflicts of human experience out of myself, if I could.
It's all chaos, just as much as there's chaos outside of us. There's chaos inside of us.
Sometimes you work a job and it's like you want to, when you get the opportunity to like bust loose, it's like you can't go into your, like the mailman can't go into the post office and say like fuck you to the supervisor, or I hate your guts, without fearing that he's going to lose this job that he's had for like 15 years with all of its benefits and its securities. So rather than do that, he plays drums at night. I hate my boss. I want to kill him.
When punk rock came along, it was like, wow, you could be as angry as you want to be.
It brought out guys who wanted to get drunk, put their fists in the air, forget their problems for the night, and get that kind of release.
Well, I went to shows where people got beat up, and that fights would break out. For kids who didn't understand that, there's sort of this rough thing going on where there's
certain people that are so stupid, they don't know how to use that energy to do something with it. They have to be violent with it. And then anyway, I don't believe that all punks are violent. I think that's just a methodical load of crap. That basically, it's the other elements that are with these people at a particular time. If you go and drink a lot, do you understand, and you're with a particular element that wants to go, right, now we're going to fucking blow the car up. Well, everybody's going to go, yeah, let's all fucking smash the car.
And we've been kicked out of Toledo, beating each other up on stage, when we broke up on stage, and I tried to beat up the whole band, but they beat the shit out of me. I woke up the next day thinking I won.
We've had our share of like broken bones. We had one kid break a leg in 16 places, leaping off a balcony in Santa Barbara. Normally the kids would leap off the stage and everybody would catch him, put their hands up. For some reason, everybody just cleared a big space. It was like a parting of the Red Sea. And there's the floor. There's the kid on the floor.
16 people actually set about me one night and smashed my face in with an hour's worth of jumping up and down on my head.
I died 3 times, DOA. And I wrecked 14 cars, 6 motorcycles with no helmet. I mean, all kinds of crazy shit where, and then just still kept coming back. For a while, for a few years, it was just daily. Something really tragic would happen, but I would still keep living. And so I couldn't understand that. Well, I finally got off this shit. It's been about 4 years away from that. About 6 months or 8 months off the booze, because I just doubled up on that when I quit the heroin.
People weren't doing heroin. That's, there were a few people that were. I'm sure the Dolls had done or tried heroin, way before the CBGB scene. it's like, you know, you graduate up to try other drugs if that's what your thing is, you know. But I never felt in any way at the CBGB's thing that drugs was a pervasive thing. And maybe I'm naive, but, you know, most people were drinking Budweiser and maybe smoking pot.
Heroin right from the gate. You know, all the young, you know, thought all my heroes were dying of it, so I might as well get, you know, as soon as it was dished out to me, I was like, yeah.
I was the drunk, and Chris was the cokehead, and Jay was the you know, dope fiend, and then various drummers. You know, we did have one heroin drummer, but you know, and one Jesus drummer, and you know, Jesus is a drug too, of course. But yeah, that was part of the problem with our band. I think we weren't all on the same drug at the same time usually.
You're already a loser in a loser's world anyway, so you're helping yourself to a loser's drug to make you even feel even more of a failure. But that's a different, again, about punk rock. Being a Hersham boy in a place that you can't even find on the map was an ideology that I didn't need drugs to escape. I needed to escape from the thing that I needed to escape from.
We got signed to something, but we blew it because we were shooting up right in front of the record people, and right when they came, we didn't know how to keep a record deal or anything. They walked out scared to death. You know what I mean? These guys are, not, you know, it's not a good investment.
It had a big influence on a lot of people I photographed and got to know, and it's a bad thing. Stay away.
What happens is it's these people that maybe, you see, if Van Gogh had discovered dope or cocaine, or if Van Gogh had been on Valium or Prozac, would he have painted the paintings that he painted? We'll never know, will we? Because he did what he did at the particular time he did it. Would John Lennon have said half of what he said if he wasn't on heroin at different times? Or did he say the good stuff on heroin, or did he say the bad stuff on heroin? That's even worse of a nightmare, isn't it, to people, in other words? If Jesus Christ, do you understand, when he was a teenager, had to go to school, would he have ended up saying half the things he said to different people from Nazareth to Bethlehem? We'll never know, will we?
There were let's see, let me figure this out. 2.5 Jews in the band, and our bass player was just this hick from Kansas. So he showed up to one of our shows one night wearing a swastika armband.
Oh yeah, the Nazi tykes. Right.
Sid wore the shirt.
I know Sid wore the shirt, so do you have any idea why he did? But you're not giving them.
Yeah. Sid did everything to piss people off.
Yeah. Iron Cross. I love Iron Crosses, you know. And I'm not a Nazi. I just like them. I've always liked them. I used to like swastikas, but it's too. You can't. You know, because Sid Vicious and all. You know, the shock of it all. But
I mean, he was trying to get me to take some pictures of him, and I was really kind of opposed to the idea of a swastika as a symbol because I know how hurtful and what kind of memories it brings up in a lot of people that are very hurtful and painful. And I said, I don't really want to show swastikas all over the place. And he was saying, but these are funny, they're colorful, they're bright. It's just a symbol. I said, when kids, he was saying that when kids today see these, they're going to laugh.
And of course, then when you get into the discussion of punk, of that moment, of how you were at that moment, every day you were different. Every single hour you were different. You were learning. You were with people that would go, what the fuck are you wearing that for? And what are you doing with that on you? Got me? So you'd either go, yeah, you're right. Or you'd go, I'm fucking wearing it because I'm a fucking Nazi. Got me? If you're going to do that, then be honest. But I could never do that because I wasn't. And it was, for me, just a piece of fuck-off equipment for 2 seconds. And that's all it was for 2 seconds.
And so you did see people with swastikas. However, in the context of the time, you have a fascist party called the National Front who were on the rise. And so therefore, it was tapping into something that was very serious.
I never understood the Nazi thing. I guess that is a real thing where, you want to shock somebody or upset somebody. I don't think it was a big thing in the New York scene at all.
No, there was no Nazi symbolism in New York City. I think that was out of New York.
When the Heartbreakers would begin a show in their early, their first career with Richard Hell, and then they used it later on. They actually began their whole show with Nazis, like a Nazi sort of sound and Hitler's voice, with boots marching on stage, and this would be really loud. It would blare very loud in the club, and this was. I don't know if, I think this was in CBGB's, and then they would come on and start playing. So they would put the audience into this really intense kind of place before they would start playing.
Can you wear a swastika without making a statement? I mean, the early punks were saying, well, we were doing it as a shock tactic, or as a bit of sort of anti-fashion. It related to the camp films like The Night Porter and that sort of thing.
Because basically they were kids who were scared of their own lives. They had no future, or that seemed available. It was very hard to find any kind of comfort in life, and so if they could go up and shock somebody and scare them back, it was kind of getting even. In the early 70s, I was working for a lot of the big bands, everybody from Led Zeppelin or Elton John or you name it, Cactus, Boston, all kinds of different bands, that would play at Madison Square Garden to some huge show, and 20,000 people would cheer, but they were mostly, kind of regimented in the seats, and there was a big show where you could be a block or two away from whoever you were watching down on the stage. And it was much more fun to me, like when I was done, and after the show, I would get down to CBGB's, and you could stand at the bar, the band was right in front of you, you could chat with all the girls, you could talk, you could have a beer, run into your friends. It was a much more social scene, and it went late.
But then it was just kind of a way, and I always worked there, see. I didn't just go to CBGB's to hang out, I worked at CBGB's, and I hardly ever went there when I didn't work there.
What did you do there?
I was the person at the door that took your money. Yeah, so, it was a good place to be. People would hang out in the front, It was a lot of people, remember hanging out at the front of CBGB's and talking to me as much as trying to fight for a place to see the band, because there was more air towards the front and you could go in and out. There was a couch behind me. People would sit there.
You had Blondie, you had Television, Make the Ville, Ramones, Dictators, Talking Heads. Each band was an individual entity in its own, but somehow you could lump it together as an art movement because they were not mainstream.
There in that period of 2 years, it did seem like we made our own world where there was this sort of shared set of values and this tolerance and belief in each other and mutual support.
My time of punk, which was the 70s, the prevailing sort of force behind everyone's activities was fame, not money. And I think that in itself is, that was the final objective. But fame comes, there's a lot of things connected to fame. Getting laid with the right person, having the right friends, getting to certain restaurants, having entree, to certain places, being looked at on the street in a certain way. Those were the things that people really were interested in.
Did you want to become famous?
Oh yeah, sure. Of course.
The thing that Elvis Presley was the beginning of something so exciting that it was a bit like when man landed on the moon, wasn't it? And what are we going to do next, folks? Guess. Elvis Presley was exactly the same. Here's one of the most beautiful men ever, do you understand, to stand in like an Olympic god, do you understand? To stand there and sing these particular songs with energy and sex. Do you understand that suddenly girls believed that there was going to be hundreds of these people all coming about afterwards? But of course there wasn't. There wasn't. There's thousands and millions of impersonators of this particular person, but there certainly won't be thousands and millions of impersonators of Britney Spears, because she lives next door. Britney Spears is just the girl next door. Elvis Presley never lived indoor to anybody. He was totally unique.
When I was a kid, yeah, I just wanted to be the best, actually, and I wanted to be the best skateboarder, and then I always wanted, you know, it's that rock and roll dream when you're a kid, you know, this, you know, we want to be like them, or whatever.
I had no visions of grandeur. It was like, this is something to do. I'm having fun. I'm enjoying myself.
You don't go into a pop medium without the idea of wanting to, that's what success is. And getting famous. So, I mean, I didn't succeed on those terms.
Whoever I wanted to look at was myself, wasn't who I was. Because I knew I was going to get really damaged by this bullshit. Whatever this famous business was about, I was going to be very badly damaged.
In almost every case that I can think of, what happens is the thing that makes the artist interesting in the first place is very quickly lost in the process of becoming famous. You know, what's interesting about him in the first place is usually something that a basic grit, a basic perversion, a basic, you know, something that came out of their childhood or that made them the alienated, driven person that drew people's eyes to them.
See, being famous is doing something to impress someone with. And the weird thing about being famous as well is the majority, like we were going on about my dad and so on and so forth, about that lack of love that may be sometimes not there, that I believe that's what makes a lot of people famous. That they've got a particular hang-up with their mum or dad at a particular early time in their life, and they endeavour then to be loved in such an awesome manner that it makes this case for famous.
And after a while, you know, they're still the same alienated weirdo, but now everybody loves them. And, you know, if everybody loves you, you're now lacking the basic motivation that made you interesting in the first place. Well, now, what am I supposed to write about now? I'm still fucked up, but everybody loves me, and I don't understand that. That's a little too complicated for most people to pick up on.
It seems to me like the dividing line kind of between being a kid and being an adult is that when you're a kid, you want to impose yourself on the world and change the world to be like you and have all the and be congratulated for being yourself. And the other side of that line is you realize that maybe the world itself is interesting and you should take a look instead of wanting it to pay attention to you.
See, certain people don't grow in their lives, and certain people keep growing. You know, I think that growing is painful, all right? To learn and change and become something different and advance, you know, psychologically and philosophically is very difficult. You have to die several times and be reborn within your own body. And a lot of people don't have the balls to do it. A lot of people don't have the nerve to go through that kind of, you know, what is it that a butterfly does, you know, that death and rebirth, you know?
When your parents die and you have a child, that's when you become an adult.
It was more like from being a dope addict to not being a dope addict. There was the transition into adulthood, then from punk rock to being a 30-year-old or whatever.
This morning, my little girl's, you know, sick, you know, I'm not idealistic anymore about the world at large. I'm more concerned about, you know, about my little girl. That's what I mean. You know, when you're young, you can think of the world at large and big issues. You can't once you have a family to support.
The first song I wrote in a band called The Sharks was "I Don't Want to Be 30, 30's Fucking Dead," you know, and you know, I would have to change the numbers now, but it's like, you know, I don't, you know, it's the fear of getting older, you know. Everybody that was older to me looked like a kook, and you'd have, what, is a tie going to grow out of my neck? It was a heavy fear, you know. And with my dad, I would look at him and his, what did he have? Those angel flights with the camel toe going, and the perm and mustache, and it would freak me out. It was like, why is he such a goon? And then I had to go to so many schools, and this guy would walk me, and it's like, I can get in there myself. When you're embarrassed of your parents, you know, I've had my kids do that to me when I've taken them to the skate park. It's like, look, I'm a cool guy, you know, but, you know, I don't know, it's that thing, I don't know. But you don't want to be an adult.
It's hard. To make such a big deal out of rock and roll is ludicrous. It's just ridiculous. It's just, you know, what it is, it's pop culture. It's teenage moment. That's all it is, you know, and it matters, you know, I mean, it matters for a teenager when you're a teenager, and that's perfectly legitimate.
The point was, you were into music, you really couldn't wake up early in the morning, you liked hanging out at night playing music, and so you formed a band so you could play music. And the idea to get a gig was like, maybe you'd make enough money to pay for a couple of days worth of drinks, or maybe you'd pick up a girl and have a good time. But people really didn't even think in terms of making a lot of money or making an endorsement. I mean, there was nobody doing endorsements. Nobody was asking for endorsements. You couldn't say like a band from CBGB's liked your product. People would like avoid that like the plague.
In the very beginning, it was all like, we're just going to party, we're going to have fun, and we're going to take it to wherever it takes us, and we'll just go with it. And of course, there'll be certain things along the way that we won't like. There'll be a lot of things along the way that we do like, but we'll just take it all in stride. And there was no premeditated, no mapped out, no written down course of action. It was just, let's go, let's do it.
50s were one thing, the 60s are another thing, the 70s were another thing, the 90s were another thing, and now we're in, you know, in the almost in the 21st century. So what do you, I mean, now it's like, it's about money right now, you know. You know, I mean, I think now when people see a rock and roll star or somebody who has the privileges of a rock and roll star, they are seeing what money can buy. And they become, if people have dreams of being a rock and roll star or being like a famous performer in some musical area, I think they're thinking more about the money and like, you know, like cutting through the shit, not having to go to school, not having to go through the whole system, like, you know, just cutting through the shit and getting to that money place very quickly.
Music was okay. You do it for a little while, then your band breaks up, and you go back to college and you get into the real world. Now, music business is multi-billion-dollar business. Part of international deals. There are only 4 or 5 record companies in the whole world now, major companies. At the time, there were dozens and dozens. The landscape has changed tremendously.
And today, it's difficult to say whether you can actually have anything that's underground at all, because the media is on it instantly. And I don't think, in terms of music, bands don't really have time to evolve at all.
For me, as soon as the punk thing was created, as soon as the word punk came on the scene, as soon as the corporate structure and the media got on the bandwagon, and don't forget, at that time period, they didn't really get on the bandwagon in a big way because it was a pretty small phenomenon compared to like the Rolling Stones or other things that were going on in rock and roll history. But as soon as that thing started rolling with media, then it was already bound to be dead, because implied in punk is the fact that you're not going to go all the way with a corporate system. So as soon as you get to a certain point, you know that you have to finish, or else you can't even call yourself a punk anymore.
You've got to do it right. You've got to always be. You're never going to have an audience that likes you. because you're going to always be changing, and they're always going to be coming there to see the person you had been before. You know what I mean? To really do it right, you've got to accept that and live with it and not care. But me, I'd rather stay at home and write a book than have to go out and go from town to town doing something that everybody hates me for.
That's the whole thing that's kept me alive as a punk rocker. I don't deny the word punk, because punk is dead. But the soul is bigger than what it ever was before, and that's why they couldn't sweep it under the carpet. That's what's so incredible about this whole definition of what it is and why it was and so on and so forth. Because more than anything else, here's this thing now, whereas the total architects, and you understand, generals that were brave enough, you understand, to take on this whole thing in the first place as a musical adventure that was chaotic in its way, that you didn't have to worry about who you were.